The target states, I can use PEMDAS to help me simplify expressions. So before we kick off Lesson 1.1, it might be helpful for us to review a simple phrase that you can use when you have to solve equations, numerical expressions or algebraic expressions that have lots of different operations in them. PEMDAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, as you might remember. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. PEMDAS is the proper order in which you solve expressions. You start out with the P in PEMDAS, parentheses and brackets. It's a grouping symbol. So what's inside the parenthesis happens before what happens outside the parenthesis. And sometimes you have parentheses inside parentheses called nested parentheses. In that case, they might use a bracket so you don't get confused by two parentheses. But that's not always going to happen. The E in PEMDAS stands for exponents. So if you were to go inside the parentheses, you'd be looking for exponents first. But exponents have to happen before you do any multiplying or dividing, and then any adding or subtracting. An exponent is like x squared, or 3 squared. Just remember 3 squared is 3 times 3, not 3 times 2. 3 squared is 9. Then there's multiply and divide. This is where it gets a little tricky because multiply and divide always come before adding and subtracting, but multiply and divide happen from left to right. Multiply does not always come before divide. Multiplication can come in lots of forms. It could be written like this, 2 times 4. It could be written with a dot. The dot is to avoid confusion if you had variables like an x. Or it could be written without any operations, with a parenthesis. This also means 2 times 4. Divide can be written a few different ways too, with the division symbol or a fraction bar. And we all know what addition and subtraction look like. But let's try a problem, and let's apply PEMDAS to solving this problem. I think a good first step whenever you have to solve a PEMDAS problem is to just write down the word PEMDAS. Just jot it down on your paper. If you know you're solving a problem that has many operations in it, jot PEMDAS down and use it as a checklist. So let's try to solve this problem. P in PEMDAS. Are there any parentheses in this equation? There are not. Exponents. Exponents come next. So are there any exponents? There is one. So that's what I would solve first. 3 squared is 3 times 3 or 9. And it's a good idea to rewrite the whole problem. Keep track of 1 or 2 steps at a time. Exponents. There are no more exponents, so I'm done with exponents. Okay, multiply and divide come next, from left to right. So this is where some people get confused. The division is before the multiplication. So some people might jump to the multiplication because they see that multiply in PEMDAS comes first, but that's not what we do here. We do this from left to right. So let me just clear a few things up. So if I were evaluating this expression, I would take this part of the equation, because it's where the division and multiplication is, and I'm going to do it from left to right. Multiply and divide happen from left to right. So I'm taking on the multiplications and divisions. 6 divided by 2 is 3. I'm going to rewrite the problem. Now it's 9 plus 3 times 3. Multiply and divide, I still have multiply and divide, so that's my next step as well. That's 9. So now I'm done with all my multiplications and divisions from left to right, and I'd be left with 9 plus 9, or 18. So remember PEMDAS. You might want to jot it down on your paper, but I'm going to ask you to click pause and try these problems out. Here's 4 problems for you to try. The question is, which step would you do first in each expression? So number 1, if you look at it, what would you do first? So just take a look at each one. If you want to solve them, you can. I'm not going to solve them, but we're just going to talk about which step you would do first. So click pause and try these problems out, and when you're done solving them, click play, and I'll go over them, and you can see how you did. Okay, let's try out number 1. According to PEMDAS, number 1 has no parentheses, has no exponents. It has multiplications and divisions. So what would I do first? Would I do the multiplication first or the division first? Well, if you remember what I said earlier, Multiplication and division happen from left to right. So you would do division first for number 1. So your first step would be to divide. 4 divided by 2. Okay, number 2. Number 2 has addition, multiplication, and division. So the multiplications and divisions parts of this problem are going to happen first. What would come first, the multiply or the divide? Number 2, the correct answer was multiply. You would multiply first. That would be your first step. Your next step would be to divide. Your last step would be to add. Okay, number 3. Let's throw some parentheses in here. Using PEMDAS, number 3, I go inside the parentheses first. There are no exponents. Then multiply and divide comes before add and subtract. So my first step in number 3 would be multiply. First step would be to multiply 2 times 2. Okay, number 4. Number 4's got it all. So I have parentheses. Using PEMDAS, I'm going to start by looking inside the parentheses. And when I go into the parentheses, I see an exponent. That's what I would do first. My first step in this problem would be to solve the exponent. So if I solve this one, I would solve it. 3 squared is 9. 10 divided by 5 plus 9. That's still in parentheses minus 6. My next step would be divide. So it's 2 plus 9 in parentheses. Not that I need them anymore, plus 6. My stylus isn't working right. So now I would add, and I would get 11 plus 6, or 17, just in case you were wondering. So the first step in number 4 was exponent. So how'd you do? Check your answers. Great job.